The ambient temperature in the primary corporate server room sat strictly at 62 degrees Fahrenheit, but the thermal output radiating from the mainframe rack directly in front of my face indicated an unauthorized, aggressive data load. I knelt on the raised, perforated anti-static flooring, keeping my center of gravity low to the ground. I ignored the steady, low-frequency hum of the industrial cooling units that vibrated up through the thick rubber soles of my boots. The artificial scent of recycled ozone, warm copper wire, and chilled silicon hung in the windowless space, a sterile environment designed entirely for machines, not people. I didn't need to look at the localized telemetry matrix on my secondary monitor. I was already drilling into the raw, unfiltered hexadecimal code of the server's primary firewall architecture. I isolated the final 3 seconds of the internal traffic log. My eyes scanned the rapidly shifting columns of numbers with hyper-focused efficiency, filtering out the background noise of the servers. The data flow hadn't dropped due to a scheduled, routine server reset. It had spiked violently, hitting the absolute ceiling of the outbound bandwidth 2.4 seconds before the total system lockdown triggered. A backdoor had been artificially pinned wide open, clumsily disguised within the code as a routine off-site backup protocol. I ran the comparison again, authorized traffic output versus the physical port access logs. My stomach dropped instantly. The numbers refused to match. 2 independent tracking systems disagreeing meant one of them had been deliberately forced to lie. Someone was actively siphoning the company's proprietary client data right under our noses. I find the open doors before the real thieves do. But this time, the thief was already deep inside the house, operating with top-tier administrative privileges. The steel-reinforced door to the server room didn't just casually open, it was shoved inward. The magnetic lock disengaged with a sharp, echoing clack that cut cleanly through the white noise of the cooling fans. If this active breach isn't isolated and secured tonight, my entire independent audit fails, a woman said. Her voice carried over the hum of the servers, completely devoid of panic, functioning purely on ruthless corporate survival logic. If the audit officially fails, Director Vance gets to quietly bury the evidence, and my agency loses its master contract by Monday morning. I didn't look up from the glowing blue screen of my modified laptop. I need 14 more minutes to secure the encrypted data packet from the compromised sector before the automated corporate failsafe permanently wipes the local cache. If I don't secure this specific packet, my firm's reputation burns with it. I need the digital chain of custody. You don't have 14 minutes, Mr. Evans. The internal security sweep doesn't care about your download speeds, she countered, stepping fully into the cold room. Her low heels clicked sharply against the metal floor panels, a stark, human rhythm against the drone of the machines. I finally looked up, irritated by the sudden interruption to my carefully established workflow. She stood amidst the towering black server racks, wearing a sharp, tailored gray blazer over a high-necked black sweater. Her dark eyes held the practical, unyielding urgency of someone who understood the brutal metrics of corporate liability. I'm Sienna Martin, lead auditor for this specific financial sector, she stated, her breath catching slightly in the artificially chilled air. Vance's office just sent an automated, encrypted memo on the executive channel. They are officially declaring this entire sector a compromised loss until the quarterly review. He wants to bury the evidence, discredit my jurisdictional authority, and physically seize the hard drives the second the building unlocks tomorrow. He's weaponizing the breach protocol to cover his own tracks. I tapped the mechanical keyboard, initiating an emergency forced cache protocol. I watched the progress bar inch forward, saving the heavily encrypted packet directly to my air-gapped solid-state drive before the network could manually eject my credentials. If Vance caught me in here with an open terminal, the chain of custody was dead, and the data was legally useless. Vance was actively trying to save himself, I stated, unplugging the braided data cable from the server port and snapping the rubber protective cap back into place. He knows perfectly well this specific offshore data belonged to his primary shell corporation. If I prove a massive data breach due to his intentionally skipped security protocols, his entire department budget gets audited by the Federal Oversight Board, which is exactly why my temporary auditing office is 3 floors down in the secure sub-basement, Sienna corrected sharply, refusing to let me intellectualize the immediate physical threat. It has a steel door, a standalone analog network connection, and poured concrete walls. We are leaving this floor. Right now. I counted the remaining floors, the documented sweep pattern of the night guards I had memorized earlier, and the weight of the solid-state drive in my pack. We had less than 2 minutes before internal security boxed us into the server aisle. Lead the way, I said. I powered the laptop down to mask our digital signature, slid the device securely into my padded backpack, and grabbed my tool bag, ensuring the steel zippers were locked tight. The descent down the concrete emergency stairwell was an exercise in silent, focused physical endurance. The air grew progressively colder, staler, and heavier the further down into the building's foundations we went. I didn't use the digital map on my phone. An active cellular signal was a massive tracking risk inside a hostile corporate structure. Sienna stopped a few paces ahead on the second landing. She didn't panic, and she didn't hesitate. She turned back, stepping close enough that I could clearly see the tension pulling tight in her jaw. She checked the shadowy corridor above us, listening intently for the thud of security boots on the concrete before pointing a finger at an unmarked steel door. "Look at the hinges," she instructed, her voice a harsh, barely audible whisper. "The layer of dust is only disturbed on the inner edge. They don't patrol this specific archival sector at night. They think it's empty." I looked at the door. It was purely analog data, devoid of digital footprints or IP addresses, but it was highly accurate and immediately verifiable in the physical world. I adjusted the straps of my pack and followed her. She moved with a relentless rhythm, reading the invisible physical landscape of the building through localized experience. When we finally breached the door of the sub-basement office, the sudden lack of ambient building noise was a physical shock. The silence inside was absolute and thick. Sienna slammed the brass deadbolt home with a definitive, metallic clank, locking the corporate threat out of our immediate reality. The room was highly utilitarian, completely devoid of any modern corporate aesthetic. It was dominated by a scarred wooden table sitting solidly in the center of the poured concrete floor. The walls were lined top to bottom with gray filing cabinets and archaic dial combination safes. I unzipped my backpack, pulled my laptop back out, and checked the battery life indicator. 40%. I had deliberately kept it off the charging block upstairs to remain highly mobile. "Put the screen down," Sienna said, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet concrete room. She was methodically organizing a stack of printed ledgers on the far end of the wooden table. She didn't look up as she spoke, her hands moving with absolute precision. "The digital world doesn't matter a single bit if Vance's physical security team breaches that door because they saw the glow of a monitor under the crack," she said, pulling a brass key from her blazer pocket and locking the primary filing cabinet behind her. "We need to secure the perimeter first." I looked at the glowing blue screen displaying the encrypted hexadecimal files and then looked at her. My hands stayed perfectly still on the edge of the table, but my pulse thudded once against my throat. The human hardware needed to establish physical safety before the software could be processed. I deliberately pressed the power button, plunging the device into total darkness, and set it face down on the scarred wood. "Understood," I said quietly, stepping back to visually sweep the dark corners of the room for hidden cameras or passive microphones. The walls were bare, clean. By the late afternoon of the second day of our absolute lockdown, the physical layout of the small sub-basement had naturally fallen into a predictable, efficient grid. We mapped out clear, unspoken spatial boundaries to handle the forced proximity without causing unnecessary friction. I claimed the large wooden table for my laptop, my external hard drives, and my offline data parsing. She claimed the smaller metal desk in the corner, constantly monitoring the analog building schematics and the printed financial ledgers for any structural vulnerabilities in Vance's accounts. It became our established domestic ritual in the high-stakes chaos. The first time the harsh blue screen of my laptop came up for too long, illuminating the dark room and draining the battery, she stood up without a word. She walked over, slid a thick ceramic mug of water to the exact edge of my papers. Same spot, same rule. Powered down the digital noise when it mattered most to conserve the battery and my focus. I didn't argue. I hit the sleep key. She nodded once and went back to her ledgers. Sienna walked over to the concrete wall, pulled down a laminated building schematic, and spread it smoothly over the wooden table right next to my scattered technical network maps. She picked up a dull graphite pencil, marked a sharp X over the specific server room we had evacuated, and glanced deliberately at my bare wrist where my smartwatch used to be. Analog doesn't require a cloud ping to verify its existence, she noted dryly, tapping the yellow pencil against the thick map. I looked at my bare wrist, then at her precise, hand-drawn coordinates. Efficiency takes many forms. Your paper trail is currently outperforming my algorithms. The silence of the sub-basement was oppressive, broken only by the faint, distant hum of the building's infrastructure. I was sitting at the table, reviewing a stack of port access logs I had proactively pulled from the unsecured server before the lockdown. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered once, buzzed angrily, dimmed to a dull, sickly yellow, and then died completely. The steady, rhythmic hum of the building's central HVAC system sputtered, choked, and fell entirely silent. I looked up from my paperwork into the sudden, absolute darkness. Vance just cut the primary power grid to the sub-basement. Sienna stood up instantly, the sound of her chair scraping loudly against the concrete. She clicked on a tactical flashlight from her desk, the sharp beam cutting through the gloom. He's actively trying to smoke us out. If we lose the HVAC, the ambient temperature down here will spike into the 90s in a matter of hours due to the residual heat from the surrounding server banks on the floor directly above us. I have exactly 22% battery remaining on my laptop, I noted, checking the dead screen in the dark. I cannot process the final encrypted telemetry logs without external, stable power. Is there a localized analog backup? In the attached utility closet, Sienna said, moving quickly toward a reinforced side door. But I'm not a commercial electrician. I just know how to flip the main breaker. Circuits are just physical logic gates, I said, picking up my tool bag and following her into the dark. Power, resistance, ground, same rules. We stepped into the cramped utility closet. The air was already growing intensely stale, smelling of ancient dust, dry rot, and exposed copper wire. Sienna held the bright beam of the flashlight perfectly steady on the gray metal housing of the backup generator panel. She didn't waver, and she didn't complain about the claustrophobic space. She simply illuminated the necessary workspace. I unlatched the side panel and pulled it away, exposing the complex breaker matrix. I pulled my gloves off to get accurate tactile feedback. The main switch is thrown, but the physical relay is entirely jammed. I diagnosed, running my bare hand over the insulated cables to feel the mechanical resistance. Vance's team deliberately tripped the safety catch from the master control room upstairs. The system is intentionally starving itself of power to prevent a local reset. Can you clear the jam? Sienna asked, keeping the harsh light trained on the panel. We just need to bypass the sensor matrix temporarily, I replied, pulling an insulated screwdriver and a pair of wire strippers from my bag. I worked quickly, my hands moving with practiced precision. I drained the residual charge from the line, bypassed the jammed relay housing using a piece of heavy-gauge copper wire from my spare kit, and clamped it down tight to close the circuit. I ran a temporary local bypass for one secure outlet and the emergency lights, so we don't trip the main building alarm, I explained, ensuring the wire was seated correctly. It won't bring the HVAC back, but it gives us juice for the drive. Hit the manual override switch exactly 3 times, then throw the main breaker. Sienna reached forward, her thumb pressing the rubber override button 3 times with perfect rhythm before she grabbed the metal breaker switch and shoved it upward. The localized generator hummed heavily, resisting the initial load, and then caught, roaring to life with a steady vibration. The overhead bulb in the closet flickered and burned bright, flooding the space with harsh white light. The local grid is stable, I said, wiping a streak of dust off my hands. We walked back into the main office. The hum of the active wall outlet felt intensely welcoming, but the temperature in the room was already noticeably rising. Without the industrial fans circulating the air, the concrete bunker was slowly turning into an oven. The access timeline architecture in Vance's logs is completely corrupted, I said quietly, plugging my laptop charger directly into the newly powered wall outlet. picking up exactly where I had left off before the power failure. Sienna looked at me, shaking her head slightly at my immediate, highly efficient pivot back to the raw data. She walked over to her desk. She shed her tailored gray blazer, draping it over the back of her chair, as the heat began to press down on us. I heard the clatter of heavy ceramic. She walked back and set a thick ceramic mug down on the extreme edge of my workspace, same spot, same rule. Beside it, she placed exactly half of a foil-wrapped protein ration bar. Black coffee, no sugar, she said, pulling her chair out and sitting across from me, rolling the sleeves of her black turtleneck up to her elbows. And half a ration bar. For tonight, Analog gets the promotion. I stopped analyzing the complex spreadsheet. I picked up the mug. The heat, radiating from the thick ceramic, was an efficient micro-comfort. I took a slow sip. Then, I looked at the dry, crumbly square of the ration bar sitting on the foil. I broke it carefully down the exact middle, pushing one small piece back across the table toward her. She didn't argue the logic. She just took it. "Thank you," I said. "For the fuel. What exactly is corrupted in the timeline?" she asked, leaning forward slightly, her attention shifting entirely to the printed papers, ignoring the bead of sweat forming at her temple. "Vance's central office officially approved a comprehensive firewall patch exactly 3 weeks ago," I explained, turning the dense paper around so she could read the highlighted columns. "But the digital signature on the port access I pulled yesterday perfectly matches his personal administrative credential. The external security contractor billed the company for $250,000 in critical structural upgrades that were simply never performed. Vance signed off on the final security audit personally, completely bypassing the standard regulatory checks." Sienna's dark eyes narrowed, processing the variables instantly. She reached into the deep pocket of her blazer, draped over the chair, and pulled out a sharply folded, digitally stamped receipt. "I filed a formal whistleblower complaint with the SEC's secure portal before we got locked down," she said, her voice steady. "I just got the automated ping on my encrypted phone verifying receipt. That filing triggers an automatic notification to outside corporate counsel overnight. If Vance breaches that door, it won't be just my word against his." Before I could process the confirmation of her proactive systemic defense, the heavy steel door of the sub-basement rattled loudly. A deep, heavy thud echoed through the concrete, followed immediately by the high-pitched, mechanical whine of a heavy-duty industrial drill biting into the outer lock cylinder. Sienna stood up instantly. "Vance has officially authorized a private, off-the-books security team to aggressively breach this door. They are utilizing heavy breaching tools and completely ignoring standard corporate protocols. They estimate breaking the lock by morning to secure our hard drives." She looked at the heavy door, her expression grim but unbroken. He wasn't trying to win an administrative argument. He was trying to violently delete the chain of custody before it officially existed. "So what exactly do we do? We have less than 12 hours before his contractors break through that steel," she said, looking directly at me for a logical path forward. "I am choosing to protect this evidence over keeping my agency. You have to choose right now between keeping your data safely hidden on that drive or risking everything to upload it to the feds. We compile an unassailable data packet," I said, reaching out and hitting the power button on my laptop with absolute certainty. "We build a legal and technical case so structurally sound that his legal team can't find a syntax error. I need to upload the entire cached packet to the secure federal intake portal via the encrypted cellular uplink before his private contractors breach that door." The laptop booted up, the charging icon finally turning green. "The battery is recovering," I noted flatly. "But if I run the decryption software to compile the final audit report, the processor will still bottleneck. I simply don't have the processing bandwidth to jump between the scanned municipal spreadsheets and the access logs simultaneously while maintaining the uplink." Sienna didn't hesitate. She pulled her chair around the table, sitting directly beside me. She reached out and pulled the massive stack of printed server logs toward her. "I'll run the analog data," she said firmly. "You keep your screen entirely focused on the telemetry and the upload code. Tell me what dates and access codes you need, and I'll find the matching fraudulent invoices on the hard copies. We process it together." For the next 2 hours, we worked in synchronized precision. The heat in the room slowly rose to a stifling 90 degrees as the servers above us baked the concrete ceiling, but the operational focus at the table remained absolute. The sound of the drill outside the door was a constant, nerve-shredding backdrop. At 1:15 a.m., the localized lights flickered violently. The backup generator coughed in the other room, the RPMs dropping dangerously low as the bypassed relay heated up. I froze, my finger hovering statically over the digital keyboard. Sienna stood up instantly. "I'll clear the intake vent and check the line," she said, slipping out the side door into the utility closet. 2 agonizing minutes later, the generator roared back to a steady, reliable hum. She returned, covered in a fine layer of drywall dust, wiping sweat from her forehead, but the electrical grid held firm. "I need the specific billing invoice for the firewall patch." Date range? October 12th to October 15th? I ordered quietly, my eyes never leaving the screen. Sienna's finger flew rapidly down the columns of printed paper. "Got it. Invoice 4,409. Billed by Apex Cyber Services on October 14th. Total cost, $12,000. Authorized by signature code MV01. MV01. I typed the code directly into the formal incident report on my screen, locking the variable into place. Director, Vance. A heavy, metallic screech echoed from the steel door, followed by a loud snap. The outer housing of the lock had failed. Sienna glanced at the door, then immediately back to the paper logs. "They're through the first layer. The inner reinforcement bought us the rest of the night, but we only have about 40 minutes before they regroup and punch through. Focus on the invoice dates," I said, my fingers flying across the glass keyboard. "We are building a firewall out of paper and code." At 2 in the morning, I hit the final execution command. The laptop whirred loudly as its cooling fans engaged, desperately fighting the ambient heat of the room, compressing the files into a single, encrypted packet. I initiated the cellular uplink. The progress bar crawled across the screen with agonizing slowness. 10%. 20%. Suddenly, a deep, rhythmic vibration shook the floorboards beneath my boots. Another heavy impact struck the steel door, bowing the metal slightly. The physical threat was literally knocking at the door while the progress bar hovered at 90%. I stared intently at the progress bar, my eyes burning fiercely from the harsh blue glare of the screen and the stinging sweat. My back was stiff. I reached out blindly across the wooden table, my hand searching for my empty ceramic mug, needing the physical, tactile sensation of the object to ground myself. Sienna smoothly intercepted my hand before I knocked the cup over. "Step away from the screen. You've been staring at that blue light for hours. Drink this, then breathe." She placed a fresh, hot cup of coffee perfectly into the center of my palm. "Upload complete," the laptop chimed softly, displaying a bright green confirmation check mark. Steam curled off the dark coffee between us. For once, I let the green confirmation check mark sit there on the screen without trying to vocalize the back-end architecture. I pressed the power button on the side of the laptop, instantly killing the blue light and plunging the wooden table back into the dim glow of the room. I placed the device face down on the wood. I turned my chair slightly, keeping my hands resting loosely on my knees, and gave her my full, undivided attention. "The primary data is securely cached and successfully uploaded to the federal intake portal," I said quietly. She didn't reach for me, she just stayed in the chair beside mine, calm and steady while the room finally went quiet, the drill pausing outside as they backed off near dawn to avoid leaving visible damage before the morning shift arrived. The next morning, the heavy steel door was finally breached, the massive deadbolt completely sheared off the frame. But it wasn't Vance's private security team standing in the hallway. A team of outside corporate counsel, accompanied by board member Davis, flooded into the sub-basement. Davis was flanked immediately by Director Vance, who was wearing a highly confident, arrogant smile. Vance had brought his own internal security deputies, clearly expecting to confiscate the evidence by force. Sienna and I stood up from the wooden table to meet them. I stepped into Vance's path before he could reach the table, the manila envelope already in my hand. "Auditor Martin," Vance said smoothly, projecting unchecked authority. I am formally relieving you of your corporate duties effective immediately. Hand over all access logs, any printed documents, and the physical hard drives immediately to my security team. I didn't raise my voice. I simply presented the undeniable weight of the data. Director Vance, I said, my tone flat. I am the lead penetration tester assigned by the Oversight Board. I have already successfully completed a secure data transfer of the entire server telemetry directly to the SEC intake portal via cellular uplink. Vance's confident smile faltered slightly. He glanced nervously at board member Davis, who remained stoic, his hands clasped behind his back. I turned my attention to Davis and handed him the sealed envelope. Mr. Davis, this physical packet contains the localized data summary and the hard drive backup. It explicitly details a $250,000 fraudulent billing scheme for corporate cybersecurity maintenance that was never actually performed. This technical data is cross-referenced with specific wire transfers authorized directly and solely by the director's office. Vance's smug expression vanished, replaced by a tight, furious panic. He stepped aggressively towards Sienna, trying to bypass my physical block. You have absolutely no authority here. You're fired. Give me the primary hard drives right now. Sienna didn't flinch. She stood her ground perfectly, her posture relaxed. She reached into the deep pocket of her blazer, pulled out the folded, digitally stamped document she had shown me earlier, and handed it directly to Davis. Mr. Davis, this is a formal, documented whistleblower complaint against the director's office, Sienna stated, her voice carrying clearly in the stale air. It was filed directly with the SEC secure portal prior to the lockdown, which is why your office was notified overnight. It explicitly outlines his ongoing attempts to coerce local auditors into ignoring severe safety violations. Sienna turned her gaze directly to Vance, her chin lifted high. And for the official record, Penetration Tester Evans is formally listed as my primary partner on the chain of custody documentation. His uploaded data absolutely corroborates my report. You can't fire him, and you absolutely cannot touch the servers without going through both of us simultaneously. Not optional. Davis slowly reviewed the paperwork, his expression hardening into stone. He carefully folded the documents and placed them securely into his inner pocket. He turned and looked directly at Vance. Director, you'll need to accompany the corporate counsel upstairs immediately, Davis said, his voice dropping into an official register that left no room for political maneuvering. Vance glared at me, the bullying energy completely evaporating as he realized his entire corrupt system had been dismantled. He had absolutely no leverage left. He turned sharply and walked silently out the door, followed closely by his own bewildered security team. Davis nodded respectfully to us. The federal board will contact you both for the official depositions next week. Outstanding analytical work. Mr. Evans, you will be retained as an expert witness for the duration of this investigation. Good job holding the line, Miss Martin. Your agency's contract remains fully intact. When the authorities finally cleared out, the profound silence of the sub-basement returned, heavier and cleaner than before. Sienna let out a long, slow breath. Her shoulders dropped 2 full inches. She turned to me. You compiled a mathematically perfect data packet, she said, looking at the empty doorway. We built a highly functional firewall, I corrected mildly, ensuring the credit was distributed accurately. The room was quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't scrape against my nerves. My hand stopped on the cold edge of the scarred wooden table instead of immediately reaching for the laptop. We debrief at the diner by the precinct, I offered, keeping my hands resting loosely at my sides, deliberately managing the distance between us, not out of hesitation, but out of respect for her boundaries. One deposition at a time. Same table, same rule. Screens stay off. After the first deposition, dinner is not work anymore, she said, with the first real smile I'd seen from her all night. She didn't wait for me to suggest it. She claimed the space herself. Just as long as you promise to leave the laptop powered down? Agreed, I said, the single word feeling entirely right. We walked back to the heavy wooden table. The ceramic mug sat beside the powered down laptop, a quiet anchor in the dim light. The end. Closing thoughts? Core lesson. A strong partnership requires shutting out the noise and focusing on the person standing beside you. Green flag. He powered down his screen when she asked, proving her presence mattered more than the data. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.